Thank you everyone for being here. We're really excited to welcome two of the most respected human resources leaders in the United States as it relates to the employers that they're serving or the employees that they're serving within their employers. And so we'll start with Bill Strahan. Bill is with Comcast Cable. He's the Executive Vice President of Human Resources there, supporting a wide and disparate workforce across the country and around the world. Pat Wadors is the Chief Talent Officer at ServiceNow. Thank you both for being here. Thank you both for spending time with us on a really important set of topics.
My pleasure.
So we've got a set of questions for you that really speak to how the role of human resources has changed with a series of sort of earth-shattering events that have happened in our country over the course of the last 90 to 120 days. And we'd love to just hear about how you're thinking about that within the context of your business and within the context of supporting the employees within those businesses. And so, Bill, I'll start with you. You're the HR leader at one of the largest employers in the United States. You've got a vast and varied workforce all around the country. Today, they're working from home and out in the field. They're on the front lines with the customers. Can you speak a little bit to really a couple of things? What new policies and support beams have you focused on as it relates to the health and safety of your people? And along those lines, how have you thought about your health and wellness strategy as it relates to employee health beyond physical health onto things like emotional health in this trying time?
Sure. So, Raj, first off, thanks for having me, and thanks for having this important conversation. And Accolade's an important partner for us in all of these issues. So it's a perfect forum and format for the conversation. So good, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be It has changed, and I think one of the most material ways that the role of HR has changed is the interplay and really being deeply involved in operational decisions and operational planning, far beyond anything that we have done in the past. So we've had to bring in a huge amount of medical information, public health information, epidemiology, and statistical modeling. We are doing modeling where county by county, we're looking at changes in the COVID relationship and interacting with our colleagues in operations to help plan out, will we have retail stores open in a particular area or not? Will we do our traditional home visits and business visits for the installation of cable and broadband services or not? We're in a really interesting role and privileged role where exactly what our hero product is, our broadband services, are in fact a huge amount of what's keeping infrastructure in the country working today. The very fact that we're having this call today is riding on the back of a network that has served the country well. So we've got to do a few things. We've got to increase the capacity of the network to make sure there's still enough buffer, even though the network has held up incredibly well. But we've also had to invite new Americans in who maybe were not our customers, maybe because they couldn't afford it or they didn't know how to get to the internet. So we've had to jump people over the digital divide at the same time that we harden the network, at the same time that we provide this medical insight to say, can we or can we not go into customers' homes? We've had to cut back in-home visits to the 4 essential things. We've had to cut back retail services in areas where the COVID virus had spiked. So to bring it down to the core basics, we've become essentially an in-house public health service with the operations, taking on responsibility where what we do around healthcare and wellness isn't just something that happens after the fact of how well do we either provide you programs to keep yourself well and not sick, or how do we help you get great healthcare. But we've had to go into the way we actually operate the company and the operating model and impact it with the best possible data science available at the time.
It's fascinating. Fascinating how quickly you have to pivot as it relates to make changes to your business to acknowledge an unprecedented circumstance, and kudos on how quickly you've been able to change, particularly, as you mentioned, Comcast is powering this particular conversation. Without it, we wouldn't have it. We would, the business productivity issues around the country would have become even more profound.
It's interesting. The pivot hasn't necessarily been HR doing things differently. It's HR standing up and saying, we're going to take a leadership role in this cross-functional team in a way that traditionally HR wouldn't lead operationally. We would be a partner, but not leading. And because of the nature of the crisis, we've had to step up and actually lead the cross-functional process. There's a call that had occurred every day, 7 days a week for a while. We've had it back. It runs at 5 o'clock. It's actually run by the HR leader for our technology product and experience group, a woman named Melanie Penna. She's driving the cross-functional team that's driving all the policy decisions about how we're changing the operating model. And that's the pivot, and that's the essence of where HR has changed, I think, in many companies around the country during these unprecedented times.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in that this moment has called for leadership, and it is for some businesses unclear where that leadership was coming from. Businesses with strong strategic HR capabilities have seen that function jump into the middle of this, act as a leader, and sort of catalyze how the business has responded. And it's actually a perfect segue to a question for you, Pat. Your team has just brought back a whole survey, a whole set of data from your employee base, and I think the data, and not everyone has done this just yet, but I think the data that your team has brought back says that 70% of people are not yet comfortable returning to work, which for a lot of management teams is a pretty scary moment. We've built a whole infrastructure around working in the office and collaborative models around working in the office. What does that mean? What are we supposed to do? How do we communicate? How have you thought about that challenge as it respects to dealing with the anxieties of the people that you're working with, and yet still the need to get back to work and restoring that sense of normalcy around everything you've built in terms of infrastructure?
So, great question. I think it's complex. Here's why it's complex. The decision to go home was made in under 5 minutes. We were blessed to have a digital, capability that allowed us to make that decision and to get people home, get them safe. What we didn't think through, we struggled a little bit in the first, what I call chapter 1, is getting the right ergonomic setup at home. Like, so many employees talk about, my first office was in this room, then it moved over to that room, then it's in a closet, I'm in my basement. Like, the transformation of where I work at home was a journey. And then my connectivity. And then it became the Zoom fatigue, or, always being on, and what does that look like? And so chapter 1 was this awkward, from toddler to adolescence and working from home, and how do I do it? The typical remote worker had it wired, and so that their stress anxiety was, this is okay, this is normal for me.
Yeah.
And that was about 18% of my workforce, been there, done that. 82% never been there, done that. Like, they might have been traveling and whatnot, but this was completely different for them. So setting up was chapter 1. Chapter 2, that's where we are today, Raj, is the anxiety, the stress, the emotions that come with, this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is the infrastructure around my family isn't still there. I don't know how to tutor. I don't know the new math. I don't know how to do a science project in my kitchen. I'm tired of cooking. Like, it's like life crashed with work. And I actually think that's a beautiful thing. Like, when you get to see your coworker's child graduate and see the balloons behind you, or see the cat jump in your lap, or my spouse lean over and kiss me goodbye to do something, those moments are precious and dear. This is the first time in history that we're invited to each other's homes. Like, look at the three of us. We don't have a fake background behind us. I can see the photos on your desk. I'd like you to zoom on a few of them, Raj, but I get to see you from a belonging standpoint, from a culture standpoint in a company. If we acknowledge that gift of being invited to each other's homes, Gosh, that's huge. I'm teaching my employees to do that. I'm teaching them, with help of others, how to breathe. We brought Dr. Sinha into our office virtually on a Zoom. Hundreds of employees attended this. Talk about mental and physical health. Like, mental health is now no longer a hidden secret in a closet. This is like top of mind for everyone. How do I deal with the stress of family, the workload, the care, the giving, the questions on health that I don't know how to handle on COVID, to the social unrest that we've been having. We've got 2 pandemics. How do we navigate stress, anxiety, plus work? And so we're navigating that carefully with our employees, teaching them how to navigate this, making it not a taboo topic, and teaching managers. And then preparing for chapter 3, which is returning into the office when it's safe, when it's ready, when we're supported. And like you said, 71% don't want to do that right now because they don't have the support around them. They're not sure it's safe yet for them and their families. The public transportation issue. There's myriad of questions, but there's a significant group of people that I want to be back now.
Yeah.
Right. Open the doors now. I am so tired of my family or whatever. And when they say that, I don't think they realize what the new world will be. Right. So in the next several months, it'll be masks. It'll be physical distancing. It won't be the same camaraderie, ease of travel and transportation as you're used to. So chapter 3 is yet to be written for many.
Gotcha.
I have a follow-up for Pat on that.
Sure.
I'm curious, Pat, are you seeing a difference in the kind of, and maybe all your offices are in the same kind of venue, but are you seeing a difference between, like a downtown San Francisco versus a suburban location, international? Do those statistics and do those feelings remain consistent venue to venue from where they had been working, or are they different?
They're consistent globally. I found one pocket that's emerging stronger, like New Zealand has closed borders. They haven't had a COVID case in 30 days. And so they want to get back in the workplace. They want to begin back to normal, right? Whatever normal is. And so we're going to pilot some things there, but pretty statistically speaking, even in New Zealand, some employees are not ready to go back into the office in a 9 to 5 or 5-day a week mindset. So we're just now launching another survey this week. We'll close it early next week, about if you do open up the office, how frequently do you want to go back into it? Is it 2 days, 1 day, 5 days? Give me a sense when you're able to come back in. And the other nuance is VP and above, our leaders want to come back statistically way more than our rank and file do. They miss the camaraderie. It could be generational, like that's how we learn to grow our teams and see the parking lot. It could be that they're responsible for innovation. How do you do innovation virtually? And so we're leveraging like crazy the technology to do the polling, to do the breakouts, to try to work with IDEO resources to keep innovating. We've done innovation amazingly well while on COVID and working in distant locations, but there's the angst of keeping the pace.
Consistent for you, Bill, in terms of
at the VP level, where they want to come back, others are a little bit more concerned. And the only other break that I put in is where we have a number of people in downtown urban locations that take subways and public transportation to get to work. That's an additional concern, especially because it puts them a little farther. So childcare is already a vulnerability for a family, and it puts them physically a little farther from where their child would be through the day. But other than that, a lot of the consistency you talked about, and the pattern really in general is the same. So, sorry, Raj, for jumping in there.
No, I appreciate you doing so. It's actually, Pat mentioned something as in her answer that I think is really unique about what's happening right now, and that you are in my house and I'm in yours, and I'm sure my team is going to be mad at me if somebody walks behind that window sometime during the taping of this video, but it could happen. We're being asked at some level to be more ourselves in the workplace, with the acknowledgement that the workplace and the home are blending, and they've been blending for years, meaning people have been working at home at night. The hours have extended, and that blend has happened. And it leads me to the protests associated with George Floyd's murder. The country, and Bill, I know you're in Philadelphia. I'm in Seattle. There's been protests, and there was a time and place where employers didn't dabble in those kinds of conversations. They had somebody who worked in inclusion and diversity, and that was when they talked about race. And yet, at Accolade today, 40+% of our people are people of color. And there's an expectation that I think is different in 2020 than it was in 2000 around employers' role in speaking about diversity and in speaking about injustice. Comcast has always been on the forefront of this conversation. And I wonder, Bill, if you can talk about how you're having that conversation inside Comcast today and how it's being led.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. And I don't know if it's a metaphor, but the connection between work and home has blended over the longer period. The sense of definition of self that had been sort of separated from this was my personal self, this was my work self, all of that has come together. So I think that there's an expectation among employees that the employer is going to speak to their full self, their full health and wellness, their full potential, including who they are from a racial background, who they are from a sexual identity background, from every single aspect. To me, the thing that has changed so dramatically is that the language has moved from politically correct and sort of that dull corporate language of even diversity, inclusion, whether it's mentorship or sponsorship, that all seems so trite at this point. I said to a few people within Comcast, as we talked about it, I've been in a couple conversations where young people, especially, and I'm thinking of one in particular, the Black Employee Network, I met with them. A young Black woman, it was important to her to talk about white privilege, to name it, and to make sure that the Black Employee Leadership Group acknowledged it and said, hey, how are we going to deal with privilege? She also came here, she said, I'm privileged, by the way. I sit here with executives because I'm in Ben, and we're privileged because of what we do for a living and how much money we make. But that notion of that, you just described what happened to George Floyd as being murder, which is obviously 100% accurate. A month ago, I don't think we would have used the word murder. We would have said his death, maybe it would have been killing, but to begin to call things with accuracy and power in the words we choose, and for that language to become so real. We're talking to each other at work the way we've traditionally talked in our groups of friends and families. And I think language, as much as anything, has really changed it. So we've spent a lot of time, one, to make sure that everybody can be heard. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of these conversations going on. We've had some leadership messaging, as you would expect, but that can only go so far. It has to be to create the environment where those person-to-person conversations are taking place. And luckily they are. And it's almost passé now to say, well, they're uncomfortable and they're raw. Yep, they are. They're also a little frightening about how do we move on and do the next thing? How do we put them into action? We've sort of divided this into three phases: listening and learning, turning learning into action, and turning action into change for the good, meaning permanent change. And we know it's going to take us a couple of years to get there.
Yeah, I think the acknowledgement that this isn't a knee-jerk, immediate reaction, but instead a thoughtful, to your point, that it's years, that it takes, that this is if what we're combating at some level is systemic racism, and as employers, we're taking a more proactive role in acknowledging its existence and then changing it, well, that of course has to take time. Pat, I'm lucky enough to work with you as a board member at Accolade, and of course, we just had a board meeting yesterday. And in the boardroom, there we are having a conversation about race, and which really, having been in boardrooms now for 20 years, I can tell you that was the first and most significant conversation I'd had in the boardroom, beyond, to Bill's point, that sort of disconnected inclusion and diversity conversation that a lot of boards have had. And that conversation, and for example, the conversation now about the pandemic and how healthcare impacts a business's capability to continue, really puts HR, the human resources function, or we call it people and culture, you call it talent, that function is increasingly popping into the center of a boardroom and being asked questions that I think in the past haven't been asked, and more strategically aligned around what a company's trying to achieve and the role it plays beyond just securing talent and making sure they're well paid and have the right benefits package. How do you see that changing? I know you are a board member. How do you see that changing in terms of what you're doing at ServiceNow, as well as how you see boards sort of changing their roles and responsibilities?
Raj, that's a great question. I've been noodling on that quite a bit. So I think it's important. You'll see, first off, more HR professionals sitting on boards. We know talent beats strategy all day long, right? So if you got the right leaders, the right talent, then you can make a mediocre strategy be excellent, because they will figure it out. So on this issue about race and ethnicity, about our responsibility as corporations, public and private, having that conversation, that governance, that line of sight in a board, I think is an imperative. I think it's got to start at the top. I think it's going to change how we look at scorecards, if you will, of what is a healthy company and a responsible company in the communities in which we work. I think we are stepping up to that responsibility. And I think this is a moment to not make it a moment, but a movement, because just doing one course or adding one data set to a scorecard isn't sufficient. We know that, and we've got to be bolder and better than that. I think from a board perspective, it shouldn't be a once a year conversation. I think it needs to be a quarterly scorecard conversation, because you hire people, there's transitions of talent, you're promoting talent throughout your life as an organization. Like, how do you create a balanced scorecard for a company that becomes part of the quarterly conversation from a board and executive C-suite to hold the mirror up? And that's super, super important. Hold the mirror up and be accountable. And I know if the board's not asking the questions to the executive team, and we're not probing in the right way, we'll miss something. We won't make the change we need to make.
Bill, Pat just spoke to how more HR professionals are gonna be in the boardroom down the road as board members, as opposed to as just participants in the boardroom. I'm curious as to your thoughts there around the role of HR in the boardroom and whether you see that same opportunity.
I do. I think that what's changing is that boards, I think, historically have thought that they could evaluate the quality of, whether you think of it as people and culture or talent or HR, you could evaluate it through a scorecard. At the end of the day, do we have this number? Does it look like this? What's the cost for that? A little bit of a qualitative review of who's driving a specific product line, or what does our executive team look like in terms of our confidence in them. I think what's happening now is the appreciation that the whole notion of caring for people, but competing in the various labor markets, that is an everyday organic process. And that is the business of the company. That is the chief competitive question, that when it's answered and when you win, then you win the whole ball game, as opposed to it's sort of an independent metric, but then the business is over here. That is the business, is to make sure that you've got the talent to drive the next iteration of your organizational model, the next iteration of the product suite, the next way that you are going to compete. And as now boards are getting that, they'll bring that expertise up. What I think will be an interesting question is, will the generation of HR leaders that maybe I represent, right? I'm 50, I'll be 59 shortly, so late 50s. Are there enough HR leaders of that generation who presumably would now graduate at some point to populate those boardrooms? Do we actually now have enough business acumen to sit there and have that integrated conversation? Or are we still in the day of linking scorecards and metrics and output and numbers to the business plan, as opposed to being able to articulate the business plan through that lens of talent? So I think Pat's absolutely correct. What I think will be interesting is to see whether, again, the people of my generation are leapfrogged by people behind us who maybe have a little bit more cross-functional background, a little bit more breadth in their resume than perhaps some folks that are just ahead of them.
I would love to jump in on this one a little bit. So Bill, you're right. So where I'm finding a lot of leverage is when I have a strategist person sitting on my staff as a key partner. And I create my 3-year strategy roadmap against the business plan. I reverse engineer. If the business wants to be here, then I need to be a year ahead of the business or 2 years ahead of the business in order to achieve that goal. And so you reverse engineer, and that's how you build your strategy. The other thing we're learning how to do, and I think is going to be a dynamic at a board level and should be, is what are those hinge roles that are critical for your success? Not all roles are created equal. Right. We used to call them core and context. There's different strategies to talk about them. People don't like hierarchy of criticality. But there are hinge roles. If you don't have a great clinical strategy in your world, Raj, what would happen, right? If you didn't have a great blank, what would happen in your ability to accelerate growth, anticipate a problem, look around a corner? And so having the talent strategist coupled with your business strategy to look around the corner and say, what are those unique skills, at what scale, at what breadth and depth to achieve it? And it's kind of like, if you're driving large scale change, you need at least 20 to 30% of that leadership team to have been there, done that, in order to be Sherpas for the remainder.
Yeah.
Do you have enough of those? And so that is the strategic conversation, if you will, like blends together business and talent and the future and where we're all marching together.
I could listen to the two of you all day. I think this is, you're weaving together a whole set of conversations around profound change happening in the world over the last 90 days, how that impacts behavior. And it ties back to, at some level, to me, a business's capacity to pivot, to change. Bill, you might recall a conversation we had at breakfast in Philadelphia 6 months ago. And we talked about, as a student of business, I'm particularly struck by the number of times Comcast has had to change fundamentally the underpinnings of its business to remain relevant. And very few companies have done it as many times as Comcast has. And in part, that's driven by exactly what you just talked about, Pat, or exactly what you just talked about, Bill. The capacity to see in advance of what the business requires, but that the HR or the people function in that business is strategic as opposed to that scorecard-oriented sort of check-the-box function. Sorry, I'm supposed to be asking the questions, not pontificating.
But it's relevant.
You're absolutely right. I frequently think of talent as a risk management exercise, and I talk a lot about what's the risk of not having the right talent to drive the business where we want it to go. So it goes right back to Pat's point. You have to have a sense of where the business is leaning into. So it's where your economics are going, where markets are going, where the country is going, where the world is going. And then it's really kind of looking at what is, exactly again to Pat's point, what's the mix of folks that are here And are there enough people that are seeing beyond today's problems to go out into the future? And every single one of those changes can become painful. And you have to become comfortable with that ongoing constant level of anxiety that you're adding new skill sets, you're adding new perspective, and fundamentally sometimes new ways of working. Right? When I think about what's happening over the next few months, I think in our company and a lot of companies, it's coming to grips with this radical acceleration of digital transformation. So, there are a lot of companies that have been built for purpose. They're relatively younger companies that are either completely digital or largely digital already. The more important thing, I think, is that America, middle-aged America, older America, every version of America has become much more comfortable with digital processes through the pandemic, and businesses that seize on that and have been ready for it are the ones that will succeed. So the pivot that we're in the process really of making is making sure we are as digitally progressive as possible, which means that that's the complexion of our workforce right now. That's the work of the day, I think, for the remainder of this year going into next year.
Thank you for that, Bill. I think that's a great segue to you, Pat, on that same question as we kind of wrap up. The two of you, I believe, I know you won't praise yourself, so I'll shower some praise on you. The two of you are ahead of the industry in a lot of respects as it relates to what you're thinking about. Bill just talked about where his eyes are focused in the 6 months ahead. Tell me a little bit about what you're thinking about, Pat.
I will continue to put pressure on our organization, on myself and our employees and our families, hopefully, for real change when it comes to race and ethnicity and social justice and our awareness and our learning. I think we have to learn. I think we have to own our own learning and be willing to lean in to change the world for better. So I don't want to let go. It takes 21 days to create a habit. So I'm going to make sure there's this pedantic rhythm in our organization until it's in the DNA. And working on a strategy that is comprised of many voices so people see their DNA in that outcome. So we're in this journey together. It's really important. And so there's a lot of work and awareness happening now, which I'm proud of. You got to measure twice to cut and to do it right. And so it's going to be imperfect, but I feel it's imperative to make the right moves, be bold now. The second thing is on COVID and the digital transformation is what is the new world of work going to look like post-COVID, post-vaccination? I think employees have a new expectation out of all of us, and that is yet to be fully written. It's going to be a more flexible, adaptable workforce. It's going to put pressure on working anywhere. What does that mean from our tax and immigration laws and how we show up? And it'll open up a world of opportunity for more diverse populations to come and participate with your employers if you allow that to occur. And it will put more responsibility in managers to really manage and not have both a manager and an IC role, like to lead people in a distributed way with grace, meeting them where they're at culturally, performance-wise, using technology. We've got to build up some muscles that before, if you think pre-COVID, I would host a staff meeting or an all hands, X% would be online, but they would use an emoticon as a picture. They would not engage in video, right? When I was working at LinkedIn with Microsoft, they would use Skype. It would be emoticons. I mean, the resistance to be on video was high. It just changed dramatically. We can read each other's body languages. We are going to learn how to use technology like never before, and that's going to open up some doors, but we need to have some training around that to ensure it's done well. So those things I'm thinking about in the next 6 months.
It's so interesting in terms of how significant that impact has happened in the workplace, and tying right back to how that same impact is happening in healthcare. It used to be that Medicare insurance companies wouldn't reimburse for telemedicine visits that were other than a small sliver of them. That's all changed. The way the world works is fundamentally changed. There's been a lot of pain and suffering in the last 90 days. on the other side of this, there will be some positive change if we react appropriately and do the work.
I agree.
I want to say thank you to both of you, Bill Strahan, Executive Vice President of Human Resources at Comcast Cable, Pat Wadors, Chief Talent Officer at ServiceNow. This has been a delightful conversation. I wish we could do it for 3 hours, but thank you so much for making the time.
Great.
Thank you. This was enjoyable.